Hello everyone, this is Dr. Hamilton. I'm going to be giving you a brief overview of the short story The Lame Shall Enter First by Flannery O'Connor in this video. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off by giving you an overview of the characters in the setting, and then I'm going to outline a couple of the themes, and then I will read a short passage for you to consider. And this is a passage that I think is central for us to understand the story. So, what is the story about? This is the story that is about a man named Shepherd who is suffering grief over the loss of his wife. His wife has died a year before the story starts. He's living alone with his young son, whose name is Norton, and is 10 years old. Norton is also suffering from grief over the loss of his mother. And Shepherd tries to do something that I think that many people would do in his situation, which is to take his feelings of grief and try to do something good with them, to try to get his mind off of himself. So he volunteers at a reform school, and that is a school that is dedicated to helping kids that are troubled, kids that have gotten in trouble with the law specifically, and these are kids that come from broken homes, and he goes over there and he spends time meeting with these kids and trying to counsel them and help them to get on the right path, to get their lives back together. One of the kids that he counsels is named Rufus Johnson, and Rufus is like a typical kid. He's a little bit worse than the others in that situation. His father is dead. His mother is in prison, and he lives with his grandfather, who seems very unhinged, almost mentally ill. Is a religious fanatic, and he is a kid that has been getting in trouble with the law. So what Shepherd realizes, and he's looking through Rufus's file, is that Rufus is very, very intelligent. He has an IQ of 140. He is very, very perceptive. And through Shepherd's conversations with Rufus, he sees that he has an intellectual potential and that he could be a great person, could really has potential to do anything that he wants in life. And Shepherd wants to give Rufus that kind of opportunity. And so what Shepherd does is he gives Rufus the keys to his house. And basically he tells him that if you need a place to stay at some point, you can stay at my house, and I will try to help you out. So what Shepherd doesn't seem to realize is that Rufus might pose a threat to his younger son Norton, who's 10 years old. Rufus is 14 years old, Norton is 10 years old. And Shepherd seems to have a sort of low opinion of his son, Norton. He seems to regard him as selfish. At the beginning of the story, he complains that Norton has been grieving for his mother for too long. He's almost 11 years old now, and he should be getting over his grief for his mother. His grief is becoming self-centered, he thinks. And I think what's even worse for Norton is that he brings Shepherd home, lies to Norton, brings Shepherd home, saying that bringing Rufus home is going to be a lesson to him in how to share with other people. And we see right away when, it's not clear at the beginning, but we see right away when Rufus enters the house that there are very, very significant disturbing problems that Shepherd does not seem to notice about Rufus at all, or seems to overlook and rationalize. And these problems should trigger something for Shepard, a sense of danger, a sense of impending threat, and he just doesn't seem to see them. And I want to show you that passage today. He just seems blind to them. So I mean, from Norton's point of view, the point of view of Shepard's 10-year-old son, the issue and what is scary about Rufus is not only that he is kind of, he seems to have an attitude and he seems to be disrespectful, but Rufus finds directly, the moment that he enters the house, the center of Norton's pain. He finds the center of Norton's pain and exploits it and tramples on it and disrespects it and abuses it. And this, again, is what should be a real flashing red light for Shepard, but he doesn't see it. What Rufus does is, so Rufus, as I said, gets the keys to the house from Shepard. He enters the house, and what he does is to go to immediately to Norton's mother's bedroom, Norton's dead mother's bedroom. And he takes out and plays with her brushes, and he plays with her corset, which is a women's undergarment, and really makes fun of her and disrespects her. When Shepard comes back, when the father returns home, he smiles to see that Rufus is there, that he's come there. And of course, he doesn't know how Rufus has been behaving. Norton is in the closet hiding from Rufus. And Shepard doesn't think that this is weird that Norton is in the closet. Why would he be hiding from Rufus if Rufus is a good guy? And he even disciplines Norton and thinks that Norton's behavior is part of his selfishness, that he doesn't want to share with another child, with another boy, his stuff. He doesn't want to share his belongings. And so he disciplines, he disciplines Norton for hiding in the closet. And when Norton tells Shepard that when Norton tells Shepard what Rufus has done, that he's gone through his mother's stuff, that he has said disrespectful things about Shepard, that he has been disrespectful towards his mother, Shepard just rationalizes everything. We watch Shepard rationalize, saying, oh, this is just part of the way that Rufus is acting out. It's not really his true behavior. He's just, it's just that this is how Rufus is. And that Norton is attacking him just because of his selfishness and he doesn't want to share. And then he makes a deal with Rufus to spend time in their house together, with them together. So this already is a situation where, we think that there is something wrong with Shepard and the way that he doesn't seem to have the instinct to protect his son, and he seems to be so enthralled with the idea of helping Rufus that he seems incapable of understanding that his own son's reaction to Rufus, and that Rufus might be a danger to them, to Norton. So, what is it about Shepard that I want you to think about? What I want you to think about is that for those of you who are taking my Shakespeare class, Shepard can be seen as a kind of tragic figure. In tragedy, there's a word referring to a tragic hero called hamartia. Hamartia. And what that means literally is missing the mark. Missing the mark. In Greek tragedy, tragic heroes misunderstand their circumstances. They're blind to their circumstances in some fundamental way. And they could be a very good character with good motives, but they're fundamentally blind to something in their circumstances. In this situation, in this story, Shepard is fundamentally blind to Rufus's evil. He's blind to Rufus's his hostility and his aggression. He explains it. He rationalizes it as a defense mechanism. And in fact, what Shepard wants to do is to fix Rufus. Rufus has a club foot, and that brings us back to the title, "The lame shall enter first." Lame means that you're crippled, you're handicapped. Rufus has a deformed foot. And Shepard's belief, his theory about Rufus, is that all of his anger and aggression, his hostility, his getting into trouble, is based upon his club foot, that he is reacting to the fact that he's handicapped. And so Shepard makes it his mission to get Rufus a special shoe for his club foot, so that he believes that once he has this nice shoe, that his walking will be normal, other kids won't pick on him, and he will lose this anger that he has. People won't be able to notice that he has his club foot anymore, and that he will no longer have any reason to be angry and to act out. So the story is really about how Shepard tries to get Rufus this this shoe. What we'll see is that from Rufus's point of view, Shepard's desire, his belief in him and his desire to help him, his mission to help him, and the fact that he doesn't seem to see his mischief for what it is, which is just mischief. It's just the desire to do bad because it's fun, because it's enjoyable to him. If there's pleasure in being antisocial. He sees this as a weakness in Shepard to exploit, and he doesn't see it as altruism, as benevolence, as the attempt to help him. And so he goes about trying to exploit it and to show Shepard up as a fraud. So that is something else to think about. So that Shepard that Rufus seems to understand Shepard and Shepard's secret, selfish, corrupt motives better than he does himself. And so things to think about as you're reading. Think about, number one, how does Shepard's, call it a tragic flaw, play out? How does his hamartia, his missing the mark, his blindness play out to disastrous effect? Number two, think about, is it possible to do things that are selfless on the surface, but to secretly have corrupt and selfish motives that you yourself are not aware of? Is it possible to do things that are kind and to have bad outcomes in the end? And think about the blindness. Also, I want you to think about, from Norton's perspective, what does it mean to be replaced by someone else? What does it mean to have your father, the person that you love after your mother has died, the person that you love the most, your father, seem to want to replace you with a protege, somebody who is more like the kind of child that he wants, rather than the kind of person, rather than try to understand the person that you are? What is it like to have the person that you love the most, and of course that you're totally reliant on now because your mother has died, sort of suddenly become interest in helping somebody who he seems to see as flawless, despite the fact that you immediately see that he's a monster, and he seems to think that this kid is fantastic. Not only that, but that he's everything that you are not, and that he seems to want to replace you. So how does that feel, and how does that play out in the story? So I'm going to read briefly this section here. This is the section where Rufus first enters the house, and where Norton first sees Rufus. In this particular passage, which is on page 453, on the very top, be starting at the very top of page 453. So Rufus has, like I said, Shepard has given Rufus the keys to the house. Rufus has entered the house on his own while Shepard is gone, and the only person home is Norton. And Norton sees Rufus, and the first thing is that he is absolutely terrified by him. He hears him walking through the house, and he is really frightened. He goes into hiding, and then he finally sees Rufus for the first time. And so this is at the very top. And I want you in this section to think about what Rufus does to not only to disrespect Norton, but to really hurt him, and how he immediately realizes the thing that is going to hurt Norton the most. Why does he do this? Out of sheer malice, out of sheer spite, out of sheer cruelty. And when you see this, you understand the kind of person that Rufus really is. And this kind of behavior, which Norton then tells his father about, is exactly what Shepard simply doesn't see. He took off his shoes and then tiptoed out of the closet and stepped over the seed packages. In the middle of the room, he stopped and remained where he was, rigid. A thin, bony-faced boy in a wet black suit stood in the door, blocking his escape. His hair was flattened to his skull by the rain. He stood there like an irate, drenched crow. His look went through the child like a pin and paralyzed him. Then his eyes began to move over everything in the room. The unmade bed, the dirty clothes, the dirty curtains on the one large window, a photograph of a wide-faced young woman that stood in the clutter on top of the dresser. The child's tongue suddenly went wild. "He's been expecting you. He's going to give you a new shoe because you have to eat out of garbage cans," he said in a kind of mouse-like shriek. A new shoe, he speaks for his club foot. "I eat out of garbage cans," the boy said slowly with a beady stare, "because I like to eat out of garbage cans, see?" The child nodded. "And I got ways of getting my own shoe, see?" The child nodded, mesmerized. The boy limped in and sat down on the bed. He arranged a pillow behind him and stretched his short leg out so that the big black shoe rested conspicuously on a fold of the sheet. Norton's gaze settled on it and remained immobile. The sole was as thick as a brick. Johnson wiggled it slightly and smiled. "If I kick somebody once with this," he said, "it learns them not to mess with me." The child nodded. "Go in the kitchen," Johnson said, "and make me a sandwich with some of that rye bread and ham, and bring me a glass of milk." Norton went off like a mechanical toy, pushed in the right direction. He made a large, greasy sandwich with ham hanging out of the sides of it and poured out a glass of milk. Then he returned to the room with the glass of milk in one hand and the sandwich in the other. Johnson was leaning back regally against the pillow. "Thanks, waiter," he said, and took the sandwich. Norton stood by the side of the bed holding the glass. The boy tore into the sandwich and ate steadily until he finished it. Then he took the glass of milk. He held it with both hands like a child, and when he lowered it for breath, there was a rim of milk around his mouth. He handed Norton the empty glass. "Go get me one of them oranges in there, waiter," he said hoarsely. Norton went to the kitchen and returned with the orange. Johnson peeled it with his fingers and let the peeling drop in the bed. He ate it slowly, spitting the seeds out in front of him. When he finished, he wiped his hands on the sheet and gave Norton a long, appraising stare. He appeared to have been softened by the service. "You're his kid, all right," he said. "You got the same stupid face." The child stood there stolidly, as if he had not heard. "He don't know his left hand from his right," Johnson said with a hoarse pleasure in his voice. The child's face, the child cast his eyes a little to the side of the boy's face and looked fixedly at the wall. "Yakety yak yak," Johnson said, "and never says a thing." The child's upper lip lifted slightly, but he didn't say anything. "Gas," Johnson said, "gas." The child's face began to have a wary look of belligerence. He backed away slightly as if he were prepared to retreat instantly. "He's good," he mumbled. "He helps people." You see, here, Norton is defending his father in a way that we'll see his father never defends him. "Good," Johnson said savagely. He thrust his head forward. "Listen here," he said. "I don't care if he's good or not. He ain't right." Norton looked stunned. The screen door in the kitchen banged as someone entered. Johnson sat forward instantly. "Is that him?" he said. "It's the cook," Norton said. "She comes in the afternoon." And I'm going to skip this part. I'm going to go over to 455 and in the middle of the page here. The door closed to the next room. The door to the next room was closed, and this is the part where I really want to alert you to. So he's been very disrespectful to Norton, but this is the part I really want to alert you to, where Rufus Johnson's behavior becomes really disturbing. The door to the next room was closed, but Johnson opened it and thrust his head into the semi-darkness within. The shades were down, and the air was close with a faint scent of perfume in it. This is Norton's mother's room that has been left empty since her death and untouched. There was a wide antique bed and a mammoth dresser whose mirror glinted in the half-light. Johnson snapped the light switch by the door and crossed the room to the mirror and peered into it. A silver comb and brush lay on the linen runner. He picked up the comb and began to run his hair through it. So he's grabbing the comb, his mother's comb. He combed it straight down on his forehead. Then he swept it to the side, Hitler fashion. "Leave her comb alone," the child said. He stood in the room, pale and breathing heavily, as if he were watching sacrilege in a holy place. Johnson put the comb down and picked up the brush and gave his hair a swipe with it. "She's dead," the child said. "I ain't afraid of dead people's things," Johnson said. He opened the top drawer and slid his hand in. "Take your big, fat, dirty hands off my mother's clothes," the child said in a high, suffocated voice. "Keep your shirt on, sweetheart," Johnson murmured. He pulled up a wrinkled red polka dot blouse and dropped it back. Then he pulled out a green silk handkerchief and whirled it over his head and let it float down to the floor. He's rifling through her stuff here. His hand continued to plow deep into the drawer. After a moment it came up, gripping a faded corset with 4 dangling metal supporters. "This here must be your saddle," he observed. Corset is a women's undergarment that women would wear in old days, like 100 years ago. He lifted it gingerly and shook it. Then he fastened it around his waist and jumped up and down, making the metal supporters dance. He began to snap his fingers and turn his hips from side to side. "Gonna rock, rattle, and roll," he sang. "Gonna rock, rattle, and roll. Can't please that woman to save my doggone soul." He began to move around, stamping the good foot down and slinging the heavy one to the side. He danced out the door, past the stricken child, and down the hall towards the kitchen. Okay, so we see him wearing this undergarment belonging to Norton's mother and dancing and singing out the door. Okay, so weird, sort of, bullying behavior, but this is his dead mother. And so it brings it to another level. And we'll see again when Shepard comes back, we find that Shepard, that Norton tells him about this, and Shepard reprimands Norton rather than Rufus. So this is our first sign that something very, very disturbing is going on. Okay, everybody, thanks very much, and look forward to chatting with you next time.